As a community, we build empathy, curiosity, joy, and connection when we share stories with you. Welcome to Storytellers Project, part of the USA Today network.
And good evening. I'm Kirby Adams of the Courier Journal in Louisville, Kentucky, and I'm your MC for tonight's Midwest Storyteller Project. Tonight's topic is my family, my culture. And boy, we really appreciate the fact that you're taking a chance on live storytelling and sharing your evening with us tonight over the computer. Tonight, we're joining Humana and 5 Americans from across the nation to create community. Since 2016, the Storytellers Project has brought more than 100 shows each year to communities across the country. And tonight, we've handpicked incredible, inspiring storytellers to tell you their stories on that topic of my family and my culture. So please help me welcome our storytellers from across the region. They're all taking the screen right now. Yeah, they're all coming on. We've got Ashley Maribel of Cincinnati, Ohio. Hi, Ashley. Ken Tucker of Westfield, Indiana. There he is. Cherise Fleming of Lansing, Michigan. Hi, Cherise. Christine Steele of Cincinnati, Ohio. And also from Cincinnati, Ohio, Teray Howell. Thanks for taking you're making this part of your evening, you all. I know you've worked very hard on your stories. So tonight is not going to be a TED Talk, and it's not a Toastmasters or a how-to talk. It's not even an inspirational speech, an educational lecture, or a slideshow. We don't have any pictures in this one, it's just our faces. We won't sell you anything except maybe a subscription. We wouldn't mind that. This is storytelling, and storytelling is based on, well, just visiting. You open your heart and your mind, and you pay attention to a person that you care about and that you want to feel closer to. So with that being said, we invite you to do just that tonight. Now, some of these storytellers will be very polished and professional. Some will be casual and conversational, but we ask you to receive them all because that's how community change happens. We believe that creating empathy and understanding is vital at all times, and especially in times of uncertainty. So with that being said, right now, let us go ahead and introduce you to our first storyteller of the evening. Here is Ashley Maribel.
When I was 4 years old, I heard that word for the very first time, a word that meant absolutely nothing to me, yet happened to change everything. I'm sure you can imagine the word that I'm thinking of. I'm not going to say it because I believe that this is a pretty PG event, but that word really did change my life. It happened when I was only 4 years old. My cousin and I had been riding our bikes. I grew up in an idyllic, picturesque, beautiful suburb outside of Cincinnati, Ohio. And in this double cul-de-sac in which I lived, we often rode our bikes. This particular summer day, my cousin and I were riding up and down the street when a kid who I knew, who I'd played with many times before, came over to ride his bike too. And everything started out great. But then his older brother and a friend of his, who maybe were preteens, early teenagers, but seemed much bigger than we were, came over and scolded him for playing with us. You can't play with those, insert words here. We don't do that. I didn't understand what the word meant in the context or at all, but my cousin knew. And a look came over her face and she seemed a little bit scared. And then he repeated it. And she whispered to me, "Ash, we gotta go." And the sassy Ashley, which some of you probably know and shouldn't surprise you at all, said, "I don't have to go anywhere. This is my street." And she looked at me again, only this time her voice had changed. "We have to get out of here." And she took off on her bike. I'm pretty sure I wasn't even riding a two-wheeler at the time. So if that's the case, then I had some like a tricycle or something along those lines, still had the training wheels on. And I was riding back up the street to get to our house, just a few houses down. And she had thrown down her bike and run towards the house. And she was already crying and very upset. "Uncle Bob, Uncle Bob," she was screaming. That was my father. And she told him what happened. Before he darted out the door, he put on his shoes, and I remember seeing a look on his face. It was a look that I had never seen before, but it looked sad. Now, as an adult, I know exactly what that look was. It was equal parts frustration, part sadness, but overall disappointment that he had worked so hard to move his family into this beautiful neighborhood only to see the enemy show up at his doorstep, a place that he couldn't protect his 4-year-old daughter from. When he came back in the house, he said to me by grabbing my shoulders, "If you ever hear that word, know that it doesn't apply to you. You are not that word." And I remember thinking about it and asking him, well, why did they say that? What does that word mean? And he said it's a pretty mean word that sometimes others use to describe people that are like us. But I didn't understand the like us. And he's like, well, we're Black. And from that day on, for the last 30 plus years, I have thought about being Black every single day. When I think back to that story, I often think about that experience with my father, someone who grew up in a time when segregation was the law of the land, who had probably hoped that his daughter would never experience those same things that he did as a child or a teenager, and only to experience them again herself all throughout her life. I understood his thought process. A few years later, let's say 1995 or so, I was in the 5th grade. We had been given a social studies assignment to talk about a historical person or figures who made an impact on life that might have not been as known. If the project happened today, it probably would be about hidden figures. But in this particular time, back in 1995, I wrote about the Tuskegee Airmen. Around that time, a movie had come out on HBO about these people, and we had watched it as a family. But what I later learned is that my dad actually knew some of these people from the screen, that they were his friends in real life. When I told him about this project that I was working on, he was really excited and his eyes got really wide and was like, oh my gosh, I have the best idea. Let's talk about the Tuskegee Airmen. So we went to a few of their houses and we had great conversations. I learned a lot and was really prepared for that conversation with my class. I was ready to give my report. I also had drawn a picture. Now, the picture probably should have earned me an F, but the actual storytelling and the reporting, that was an A-worthy project. I remember getting up in front of the class feeling so proud to share about this experience. And after I had finished telling them all about the Tuskegee Airmen, these particular men who had been a part of a platoon that saved so many lives and never lost a single bomber, my teacher looked me in the face and said that simply is not true. There were no Black pilots in World War II. And of course she had to know because she was the history teacher. But of course I had spoken to these people in real life. And so I knew that I was telling the truth. But she had essentially called me a liar in front of my whole class. I didn't think too much of it, but the next day, the bus driver at school asked if my parents were home when he dropped me off. We were the last stop on the street. And we walked down to my house and he came up and spoke to my dad and had said that his daughter, a girl from my class and from my soccer team, had come home crying because the teacher had called me a liar in front of everyone and she was really upset and he wanted to make sure that I was okay. My dad said that Ashley had never even mentioned it. And when we talked about it later that night, he expressed some disappointment again, that he wanted me to feel that I could always tell him things and that this exact story was true. My parents later met with the school administration, the superintendent and all, and we were able to host an assembly in which a real live Tuskegee Airman and one of the men that he saved came and spoke at our elementary school. It was the first time that those men had met in person, even though they had grown up just across the street from one another and had even been photographed together in their youth. But because of their race and their identities, they had never truly crossed paths. I remember that day because that was the day that I was proven right, and I was able to share a story with the world. The last thing that I'll share with you all tonight is a story about fitting in. My neighbors had a membership to this particular swim club in our neighborhood, and it was a really big deal. Each summer, you would want to go and play by the pool. My family weren't members there. The waiting list was really, really long back in the 90s. I'm sure it's easier to get into these days now. But but I would go and swim. But I would always remember the looks on the people's faces while I was there. And even though I knew so many of these kids from school and their parents from different activities, I always felt like a fish out of water, that I shouldn't be there. Later in the summer, my friend's mom noticed that I had stopped coming with them to the pool and asked again my parents, was everything okay? And my dad shared some of the things that had been said to me while I was there. And they talked about race once again. But something sparked in my dad that summer, and he decided enough was enough. And wouldn't you know, the very next year, he had a custom in-ground pool built in our backyard. It was a beautiful pool, crystal water. I helped design the tile. It was a sock-shaped pool, and it was absolutely beautiful. My kids, who are now 3 and 1 respectively, are able to still swim in that pool today. I often think about that experience in terms of seeing a man who was born into segregation, unable to swim at a public pool, watch his daughter struggle at a private pool when invited by friends to ultimately create a pool of her dreams so that I could always feel comfortable in my own home and in my own skin and never need the outside world for validation. My father gave me so much, but most important, he gave me resilience. When I started to think about what I wanted to talk about tonight, it was clear to me that race has impacted my life. But really, this story was a love letter to my dad. My dad passed away on February the 8th, 2020, 4 days after the birth of our daughter. And what I've learned in the years since he's been gone is that resilience crosses all colors, all races, all ethnicities and religions. It's something that each of us can have and take with us every day. And it's the gift that continues to give. So as I continue to march on and continue to live life and work to instill these same values in my children, I'll always know that home is where it started. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashley. What a great story about the lessons learned from your dad and resiliency. We appreciate your time and your storytelling. Well, Humana is sponsoring Storytellers project shows nationally, and now they're sponsoring them virtually because they believe that sharing stories and connecting as humans online or in person makes for healthier people and healthier communities. And we need these connections to each other and to health now more than ever. Now, as the COVID-19 vaccines have become available in communities across the country, Humana strongly encourages you to consider getting the vaccine and to discuss with your doctor what is best for your health. You can visit humana.com for more about what they're doing each and every day to connect you to better health in your community.
The COVID-19 vaccines can be our chance to get back to our plans, to get back to each other, to life. But it's okay to have questions, like, how were the vaccines tested? In rigorous clinical trials among adults of diverse backgrounds. Find the latest information at getvaccineanswers.org.
And welcome back to the show. I'm Kirby Adams from the Courier Journal. We're glad you're with us here tonight. Storyteller number 2 is up. His name is Ken Tucker, and his story is We Don't Pick Our Parents. Ken?
Hi, I have a story I'd like to share with all of you. And I'll start by sharing the thing that I've kept from the majority of the world my entire life. Even those that are the closest to me don't know my entire story. But I come from a long line of absentee fathers. My father, he wasn't around. His father wasn't around. My mom's father wasn't even around. When I was 8 years old and I finally got a dad, his father wasn't even around. How is that even possible? But my story isn't about the people who weren't there. It's about all those people who showed up. Most notably, a bunch of really strong women who their entire lives they dedicated to their family and to making their little corner of the world a better place. And that starts with my mom. Have you ever had someone that saw the good in everyone? Have you ever had someone in your life who has given you their all? My mom has always done that. There's a certain level of empowerment to believing that you can do anything in this world as long as you don't hurt anyone else. And I don't know why she's like that. Married, divorced, 2 kids before the time she could legally drink. Have you ever known what you wanted in life? Have you ever known what you didn't want in life? I never wanted to be my parents. My mom must have felt like Atlas carrying the world on her shoulders, constantly trying to make $1 out of 15 cents. My brother and I, we grew up on welfare, food stamps. One of my earliest memories is sitting outside the Lincoln Plaza in Cedar Lake, Indiana, where I'm from, and asking my mom what we were doing here. What was this line? And an older gentleman in line looked down at me and he says, "We're here for a handout." And my mom looked at him and she told him, "We're not here for a handout. We're here for a hand up." I've lived a very intentional life. Every time I've come to a major crossroads in my life, I've often wondered, what would all those fathers have done? And I did the exact opposite. It's always taken a village to raise a family. And the first village I was a part of was a little town in Maryville, Indiana called Little America by its residents. Just off Taney Place was the Monashevitz house. I remember showing up there for the very first time, and the warmth of this place, and the people just embraced me, a complete stranger, my mother, my brother, and myself. You could smell it in the walls. You could hear it as you walked up to the steps. Jerry Monashevitz met his wife, Trinidad Catalina Lopez, very similar woman to my mother, married, divorced, but she had 4 kids. And this is the home that they created together. And this was my safe place for the next 20 years. It's a place where I spent a lot of time. We all did. It was our central gathering point for our family, for all those things that you get together with your family. And I'll never forget them, even though they've long since gone. My grandmother's cooking, enchiladas, chorizo, a bunch of, mijos just running around. It was magical. When I was 8, as I said earlier, is when I got a dad. And I remember sitting at my parents' wedding. I was a ring bearer with my younger brother. And immediately after the ceremony, I ran up to my dad and I just said, "Thanks, Dad. Thanks." Rick Monashevitz, the son of Jerry and Trina, he never let me call him Dad until that moment. And I was so happy. I didn't care that it was a shotgun wedding. I didn't care about anything else. I finally had, a family. Shortly thereafter, my brother was born, my younger brother, and that's when I began this lifestyle of being a caregiver. As early as I can remember, I remember helping out with my little brother, and then my little sister about a year later. I would kind of tiptoe into my parents' room on the weekends and get them out of their cribs, and we would all go downstairs and just spend time, because that was the most important thing. It's the most valuable commodity that I think we as human beings have for any other human being is time. And I would feed them, and we would watch SportsCenter and just spending time next to each other and watching their own shows as well. Over the next 10 years, I basically became a live-in babysitter. I was always there kind of helping out with my younger brother and sister. As they got older, a funny thing kind of happened. All that time kind of came back to me. I would always go to sleep by myself in my room with my older brother. But when I woke up, my younger brother and sister would crawl in bed with me. I would go to sleep alone and wake up 3 deep. It was one of those things that you could put a price tag on that. If you could bottle that up and sell it, you would be a millionaire. Do you remember falling in love? I do. May 17th, 1997. I was at a place that I didn't really want to be, and across the room, I caught the eye of this girl, and it was her smile. Her smile drew me to her. It was horrible timing. I was breaking away at that point. By the end of 1997, I was going to leave my family. I had done just enough in school and just enough on the athletic field to get accepted into college. If my family has a religion, it was probably sports as a child. But as an adult, it's been education. I spent 11 years as a public educator in the state of Indiana. During those 11 years, teaching wasn't easy, and it never has been an easy profession. You can learn a lot at school. You can learn a lot at home. And I blended those two things together because for me, school, education is an extension of the home. Each and every year for those 11 years, I would welcome all those families to my family because for the next 181 days, I was going to be an extended member of your family, an uncle that does random things, a chatty cousin, if you will. Hopefully you'll talk about me around the holidays with your family. The secret to education, I think, is the secret to life, and that's just making connections. And I learned that from those strong women in my life. You're never prepared as a teacher for all the things that you're going to be asked to do, especially the really hard things. The ups and downs of the school day, the ups and downs of a year. Being a part of someone's family means you're a part of their successes, you're a part of their failures, you're a part of the births and the deaths. My first year of teaching, one of my students lost their father. She was 11 years old. They don't teach you how to teach that. So I just followed the examples that I was given. Like my mom, I showed up each and every day. Like my grandma showed me, I showed people that I actually cared about them. And like my wife showed me, a smile can go an awful long way to make someone's day just a little bit better. My grandfather is a man of many quotes. And one of the ones that I've kept with me, because it always seems to apply to my life, is if you want to make God laugh, announce your plans out loud. As I said, I've lived this intentional life. I knew I didn't want to be a young parent. I did everything that I could. That girl that I met on May 17th, 1997, we dated on and off. We stayed in each other's lives. We got engaged. We planned a wedding. We called it off because it really wasn't working. And we grew even closer from those things, from those moments. We thought we waited too long to have kids. After we had gotten married, all of our friends started having kids. Why wasn't it happening for us? There was no explanation. It was the one thing that I really did want in life was to not be all those fathers. So one day outside of a Bulls and Pacers game at Bankers Life Fieldhouse, we announced our plans. We said if we weren't pregnant by a certain date, that we were going to change our entire lives. 10 months later, there we were in the delivery room. I remember holding my daughters, both of them for the first time, twice in 10 months. And I remember looking at them and thinking that everything I thought I knew didn't matter. These two didn't care about anything that I had done or anybody else in the world had done before that moment. And like a light bulb went off inside of me. And I became overjoyed. I had found that strength that I never knew I had. The thing that my mother talked about, and the thing that I've always wondered, how she was able to do that. When I looked down at them, I made promises to them. I promised that as long as I'm around, that they will have someone to listen, that they would have someone to support them. And even as important, they would have someone to tell them no. Life is a series of moments. Every day, we have an opportunity to reinvent ourselves. My family, it's perfectly blended. My culture, how much time do you have? I want to thank everyone in my life that invested their time in me and made me the person I am today And I want to thank all of you that are out there somewhere in this cyberspace that have invested your time here tonight to hear all of our stories. Have a great night.
All right. Thanks, Ken. What a great story about the importance of making connections and reinventing life. We really appreciate that. Oh, by the way, I needed to remind you about something that I forgot to tell you at all about. And that is, it's a little odd when the people finish their great stories and it's just sort of silent. We do have a way that we can sort of virtually clap, okay? It's basically hitting the like button on your screen. So I don't know if you can hit it a whole bunch of times, but at least hit it once if you enjoyed this story. I know that our storytellers will really appreciate that. So tonight's show, by the way, is produced by the Cincinnati Enquirer, the Lansing State Journal, the IndyStar, and the Louisville Courier Journal. And we had a team of journalists who helped to support and coach our storytellers for tonight. They include Melanie Laffman, Madeline Mitchell, Brianna Rice, Kayla Ketchmar, and Chris Kenning. So we really appreciate all the time that they put in. I know our storytellers do. And you can support all of our work by liking and sharing this show. And you can find it by checking out our newspaper's website after the show is over. All right. Time for storyteller number 3, who happens to be Cherise Fleming, and her story is titled, I Hope You Dance.
One of my earliest recollections is of me standing in front of a huge mirror. I'm at a ballet school. I'm about 6 or 7 years old, and the teacher is talking to us about the new ballet shoes we'll be wearing. I'm focused on the tutu I'm wearing at the moment, but she's telling us that these new ballet shoes will force us to walk higher on the tips of our toes. It doesn't sound comfortable to me. And even though I know my mom enrolled me in ballet school because I naturally walk on my tippy toes, I'm really not resonating with this pole that is going across that we have to stretch our legs onto, and they have to be completely straight, and we have to lean, and I don't even do the splits. So for me, this is not a good thing. I would much rather be on the floor at home with these encyclopedias that my mom was gifted from a neighbor who passed away. And she gifted them to me. I'm just not really reading them. I'm looking at the images and circling things. And my mom would let me write in these encyclopedias. But I will tell you that one thing I understood then and even to this day is that I craved knowledge and understanding, almost like people crave food. I used to sit on the porch and ask, why am I here and what is my purpose? It didn't seem like many people asked those questions. So as I looked at television, I noticed that the students who seemed to be like me, the kids that had their heads in books, wore glasses. So I think that's where the idea came to me, to tell my mom that I wanted glasses. She took me to an eye doctor, and I proceeded to act as though I couldn't see certain letters and such. All I know is that the doctor, he wasn't convinced. He told my mom, I think her vision is pretty good. I don't think she needs glasses. And my mom, she wasn't about to buy glasses if I didn't need them. So that plan didn't work out, and I still didn't know quite how I fit in the world. But I will say this. I definitely know I saw the world through a different set of glasses. One reason I knew is that on weekends, my mom would take us to my relatives, and they were always partying and playing cards and dancing every weekend that we would visit them. And I would say, why are they wasting their money on this type of stuff? I felt like there was greater things we needed to be doing at 6 and 7 years old. And I remember my mom would always say, oh, that's just Tutu. She's an old soul. She's a little different. And let me explain that to you. Known to my culture are nicknames. We always got a nickname from something. I got my nickname from wearing that tutu. But also the elders in our family. They could hold a baby, a newborn baby in their arms. And from a birthmark or something in your eyes, they can tell you something about that baby's future. Me, Corinne, this one here, she's an old soul. And so I became known as Tutu, the old soul. She's just a little different. I think that's why I chose the mate that I chose. He wore glasses. He needed glasses. He was dark and slender, and he was a misfit. He felt like me, I think, in his family. His brothers, he had two. They were buffed, and they were what you would call ladies' men. To me, he was the best thing since sliced bread. I was just completely bowled over by him. And we ended up going to college together, getting married. He majored in physics and calculus, I in English and digital arts. My life with him was a great adventure. He began to tutor when we were on campus, and I can recall building his first webpage. We left school and moved out to Las Vegas, started a tutoring center. We had some college buddies who were Korean. We would have students coming in from Korea. And we danced that dance for about 4 years. It was a wonderful time. It was an adventurous time. I remember we moved to Mississippi. We met a guy who owned a radio station. And at that time, I had gotten really keen on web development. For those of you who remember Front Page, that was the big designers page, well, software at that time. And we had even become keen on streaming and Facebook Live, YouTube. They weren't even out there. Even if they were, people didn't really know about them. So we wrote up an agreement with this guy to stream radio programs over the internet. We built him a state-of-the-art website. And I felt like this is what I needed to be doing, building a legacy for our sons. At that time, I think we had 2 of them. We ended up with 3 altogether. We eventually ended up with the top radio show. We landed a contract with a $1 million company managing their websites. But what I didn't realize was that during that adventure, we had somehow danced apart. And something had died inside of my heart. I remember waking up one day and everything seemed like it was gone. And I asked my partner for a divorce. And he was shocked. He said to me, "You promised until death do us part." And I said, "But something has died inside my heart." I remember us getting counseling. The counseling only, I would say, ensured me that we really probably would have been better as friends. Everything began to fall down. Our children, their work at school began to suffer. The business began to suffer. There was a tug of war going on between us. And all I can think of now is that song by Kanye West, Falls Down. Where do you go when it all falls down? Me, I went back to my family. I moved back to Michigan. I remember 16 years later walking into a party. Yeah, they were still partying and dancing 16 years later. I remember one of my uncles saying, "Tutu's back." And my auntie said, "No, she doesn't like that name anymore. We call her Cherise," because I long ago shed it. But I remember saying, no, call me Tutu. I'm good with that. And I stepped out into the dance floor, and it felt like I hadn't ever danced. I had danced maybe once, twice, but I remember them encircling me And that circle around me felt like a warm fire, and all the seriousness of life, all the pain, I guess none of the playfulness that I had had. It was almost like a freedom as I danced and they danced, and all of the burdens fell from me. I tell you, I learned to embrace my nickname being Tutu, and I learned to embrace dancing in a way that I had never done. And I'll tell you what I've learned from my time with my family is that they always accepted me. It was me who was trying to find my space. And I had to learn to accept them just as they are. Didn't know the history about the Tulsa, Oklahoma massacre and maybe what affected them in their stages of living. I just knew that they loved to get it all off of them just by dancing. I also know that I still am an old soul, but I'm starting to think maybe I'm an old soul because I needed to come back a few times to get it right. Not so much that I was so wise. And I'll tell you, I've come to love this song because my family will tell you today, Tutu, she'll dance anybody under the table. Because I danced today. And there's this song by Leanne Womack. In that song, she says that living might mean taking chances, but they're worth taking. Loving might be a mistake, but it's worth making. She says, I hope you dance. And that is my wish for you as I share my story, because I know all of life today is a dance. So I hope you dance because I dance. And I thank you for listening.
Thank you, Tutu. What a warm story. We appreciate you sharing that with us. I hope you remember to hit your like button for Tutu's story and all the stories that are coming up. And now we'll hear from one of our Humana heroes, agents in our region who do good while doing their jobs.
My name is Naida Figueroa, and I'm honored to serve our community by educating Medicare beneficiaries on the resources and the options available to them. But my job doesn't stop there. Throughout my career, I have met many people, and I want to tell you about one who's special to me. I met this woman while teaching an educational seminar on Medicare plans. She was recently widowed, and with her hair dyed deep purple, she wasn't what people think of a stereotypical senior. Her husband had handled all the paperwork, and now she was confused about her Medicare options. I slowed down our conversation and took the time to explain all her options. And with tears in her eyes, she told me that it made all the difference for her. Occasionally, I bump into someone at the pharmacy or while running errands who attended one of my educational seminars on healthy lifestyles. Often they're enthusiastic about what they've learned, telling me how they're now able to read food labels and discover hidden ingredients. To me, that's human care. The ability to provide a positive impact long after you've met someone. Whether it's sugar, the not-so-sweet truth, or protecting yourself from scams. These educational seminars I teach really make a difference in people's lives, helping our members feel comfortable in their healthcare choices.
And we're back. It's the Midwest Storytellers Project. I'm Kirby Adams, and we have more stories on my family, my culture, continuing now with Christine Steele. And her story is titled, Your Feet Will Take You Where Your Heart Is.
Now, you look at me and you often think, I know what you're thinking. Oh, what a cute little Irish girl. I got the red hair. I got the freckles. It happens all the time. One day I was downtown outside our courthouse and I was wearing this green suit jacket, and one of the random people, there's always people hanging out on the steps of the courthouse. This guy just jumps up off the steps, goes running out in the street and yells, "It's a leprechaun, it's a leprechaun." And he starts dancing this Irish jig on the street. Burst out laughing, but that happens to me more often than you'd think. But truth is, I'm not actually what you think. I am a lawyer and I teach Irish dancing. And Irish dancing, for those that don't know, is kind of like clogging, kind of like tap dancing. You don't use your arms. Over the years, when I was doing it growing up, I spent a lot of time explaining Irish dancing to people because nobody knew what it was. Then Riverdance and Lord of the Dance happened, and suddenly Irish dancing was part of the pop culture, and everybody knew what Irish dancing or river dancing was. And, after a lot of years of blank stares and empty faces, when I said I Irish dance, it's been kind of neat because now everybody knows. But in any event, I've been Irish dancing for so long. I feel more Irish than I actually am. The reality is my mother is from Latvia, one of the Baltic states. They left in World War II and went through DP camps in Germany and ended up in the US. And my father's mother's from Bohemia, like Eastern Europe, pre-Czechoslovakia. And it was only my father's father who's got Irish and English in his background. So the Irish part of me is a really small part of my DNA comparatively. But I love to dance, and my parents were folksy before folksy was cool. They liked Irish music and Celtic music in the very early 70s. And growing up, we went to we had an international folk festival here in Cincinnati, and we would go every year. And I love to watch, because I like dancing. I like to watch all the dancers, and I'd go watch all the folk dance groups. And I was mesmerized by the Irish dance group. The power and the syncopation and the rhythm was just fascinating to me. And my parents tried to get me to take Irish dance lessons. They pushed me for years. Oh, you should try it. And I was like, no, it's not cool. I was doing ballet and tap like all my friends. But finally, when I was 11 or 12, I agreed, okay, I'll try it. Well, I took a couple classes and I was absolutely hooked. So, before I knew it, Irish dance was a huge part of my life. So I was going to classes 2, 3, 4 days a week. I'd go to competitions every weekend in the summer. My parents would help out, like at our local competition. Even my uber introverted father would go and help man the gate at the dancing competition and help people in. And my mother and my grandmother, who both could so amazingly, turned those talents to helping make Irish dance costumes with all the ornate embroidery and everything that we wear. And I even met my husband through Irish dance through some mutual friends. So, and then we've had 4 children, mostly grown now. They've all danced. I taught dancing when I was pregnant. The kids pretty much grew up at the studio because I was there a lot, and it was easier just to keep me with them. I remember my youngest falling asleep on our dance studio floor regularly. She'd fall asleep head on the wood floor with dancers all around and their hard shoes pounding on the ground, and she'd be sacked on the floor. And she's now a world championship level Irish dancer. So I have to think that she might have gotten good rhythm and timing from osmosis from all those naps in the studio. My 2 oldest dancers both danced all the way through college, and my oldest is actually a teacher himself now. And I have another son who just danced for a little while. It turned out Irish dancing was not really his dream, so he didn't pursue it for a long time, but he's been around it a lot and actually is one of the best people to take to competitions because he keeps a running commentary going that's hysterical and actually really insightful because he understands a lot about it, even though he didn't ultimately do it for a long time himself. But in any event, our family's grown up around Irish dance, for better or worse. Our holidays aren't exactly normal because our major competitions tend to be over holidays. So Easter, 4th of July, Thanksgiving usually involve a trip somewhere, and we don't always all go together. So our holidays are not normal. We might celebrate early or we celebrate apart and get together at another time, but that's what we do. But Irish dancing has led me to some really amazing experiences. I got to dance for a week at the World's Fair in Knoxville, Tennessee, danced with the Chieftains, with Gaelic Storm. I've performed with Ronan Tynan, one of the Irish tenors. We got to go to Hollywood and dance for some fundraisers over a couple years, honoring Gene Kelly and Donald O'Connor. I got to hold the microphone for Gene Kelly while he was accepting his award. And for a dancer, that was way cool. I literally almost fell over and got weak at my knees when I met Jimmy Stewart. And then the one year, John Candy was there, and he danced with our dancers all night on the dance floor, partied with them all night. And it was just, any one of those things is like an amazing once-in-a-lifetime experience. But actually, the neatest thing about Irish dancing is that it's led me to be closer to my Latvian roots. Weird, right? Well, in 1990, we got to go on a performing arts tour of the Soviet Union. And this was still the Soviet Union. And we did like a couple weeks we were there. We traveled a lot, toured a lot. We saw Red Square. We saw the Hermitage, Summer Palace, Winter Palace, a working collective farm. But it was still the USSR. And my Latvian grandmother, Mamu, was very nervous about my trip because she did not want me going back to the Soviet Union. Now, remember, I told you my mother's family was from Latvia, and they fled Latvia during World War II. And they left because the Soviets were coming into Latvia ostensibly to drive back the Nazis who were coming in from the other side. But the Soviet plan was to come in and not leave because they wanted to take control of Latvia, which they ultimately did. And the Soviets were just as bad, honestly, as the Nazis with respect to how they treated people. And they treated, the resistors that wanted to retain Latvian independence were treated horribly. So my mother's family was leaving because my grandfather Papu was among the resistance that wanted to maintain Latvian independence. So they left. But my grandmother's twin brother couldn't go. I believe his wife was pregnant. They couldn't travel and they had to stay. So my mother's family came. They spent years in Germany and displaced persons camps and finally made it to the United States. They never, because the Soviets were so horrible to anybody associated with the resistance, they were terrified to have any contact with their family back in Latvia. And they didn't, because they were afraid something would happen to them. So even by 1990, when I'm planning on going to the Soviet Union, they hadn't had contact with their family back in Latvia. And so my grandmother was nervous. Well, I wasn't sure I'm going, and I was certain that the Soviet Union had certainly changed in 40 years and wasn't that horrible and everything would be okay. And ultimately, everything was okay, but it was a neat trip. I got a glimpse into that part of the world that, in Eastern Europe that my mother grew up in. And like in Moscow, there were peepholes over the hotel room doors where they had cameras during the worst of the times in the Soviet Union so they could watch what people were doing in the hotel rooms. When we were in Krasnodar, the people at the hotel, the management took our passports and kept them locked up. We weren't allowed to keep them with ourselves. They took them away from us while we were there. And all of a sudden, I had a whole new understanding for distrust of government in general, because those were things that didn't happen in the United States, but it was very common there. We learned and saw the long lines and the inability to get like the most basic things like bread and milk. I remember going to the Gums department store in Moscow, which was a famous, huge department store. And it's this amazingly ornate, architecturally ornate building with a big atrium. And we went in the department store and there was nothing in there. Like there were cashiers behind the desks, but the shelves were empty and the clothing racks were empty. It was just this big empty department store, but there were people working. And then there was one long line in the department store from one desk and one cashier, and it went all the way out the door and out the atrium. We're like, what is this line? Because the entire store was empty. And it turned out the line was a whole line of people waiting to buy scarves, because a truck had come with a truckload of scarves, and that's what they were waiting for. And that's all there was to buy in the whole department store were the scarves off that one truck. And that, again, that's stuff that's unheard of here, but was very common there. I remember we went to open air markets that had amazing like artwork and handmade embroidered items and spices and coffee in bulk, those things you could get. And I had a whole new understanding and appreciation of why my mother liked our own Findlay Market here in Cincinnati so much. We have an open air market here. And I understood why that meant so much to her. I remember we were in Moscow, and my roommate on the trip got really sick with strep throat. She came down with strep throat really bad. Well, the management at the hotel found this little old Russian lady who was probably about 4 feet tall. And she came in our room late at night, some odd hour of the night, and mixed up this concoction that was like, I had an egg in it, raw egg. It had liquor of some sort. It had tea. It had herbs, spices. It was like black tar. And they made her drink it. And she did. And amazingly enough, she felt a whole lot better the next day. And it reminded me of my Latvian grandmother, Mamu, because she always had a home remedy for everything, herbs, teas, this, that, weird mixes of things when something was bugging you or ailing you, and they always seem to work. And I was like, oh, those home remedies, they've got something there. I remember one night also we met these Russian tap dancers that were there, and their language barrier was real. I knew like 8 words and they knew maybe 10, and there was a whole group of us, but we made it through. We traded dance moves and we talked all night long, and we didn't have any trouble understanding each other. So I realized from that whole trip that for all the political unrest and differences in governments and concerns about perceptions of great divides between things like that, that in the end, the people are really not very different at all. And so Irish dancing brought me closer to my Latvian family and my Latvian background, because it gave me the opportunity to see that, a little bit of that part of my life. And with all the Irish dancing we do, we have a crazy busy life, but I'm probably closer to and spend more time with my kids and my family than a lot of people do, honestly, because we travel a lot together and we do things together, and we all share something that we love and that has brought us closer to our family and our family background. So I followed my feet and I found my heart, and you can't ask for much more than that. Thanks.
No, you can't. Thank you, Christine. What a lovely story. Thanks for sharing that with all of us. Give her a like instead of a clap, because I'm the only one who can make any noise here. And that, I can't believe we're already down to our 5th and final storyteller for the evening. Tonight's topic has been my family, my culture, and our storyteller now is from Cincinnati, Ohio. Teray Howell, here's his story called Friends, Family, and Flows.
So my earliest memory of moving to Cincinnati, I was about 4 or 5 years old, as long as I can remember. It was summer in 1990. Ninja Turtles, biggest movie out. Huge Michelangelo fan. I had like 20 Ninja Turtle dolls around the house. But I remember that summer specifically because it seemed like I just always seemed to stand out for all the wrong reasons, in my opinion. We're from New York, so I talk different. We walk different, dress different. And kids being kids, they just made fun of everything they could find an opportunity to make fun of. From my skin color, my complexion, my lips, it just, like I said, anything you could think of. And me being the sensitive kid that I was, spent a lot of time that summer coming home, just upset that I was getting picked on for one thing or another. And I always remember asking why I couldn't just fit in, why we had to be so different, why everybody could tell we were from New York and everything like that. And my mother sat me down and she told me something real important. She told me that you're not meant to stand out, or you're not meant to fit in, you're meant to stand out. The key to life is standing out for all the right reasons, which at 4 years old, I took it as best as I could. But as time went on, I started to kind of get it. So a few more summers went by, still trying to fit in that thing. And then after that, it just kind of clicked. And I would say about 8 to 10 years old is when I started to fall in love with music. Anything from any time of day, any station on the radio, you put it on, I was in love with it. Just about anything you played, I'll give it a shot. And I just remember feeling like this is where I belong as far as music. They're telling these stories. It's great stories. It's a great rhythm. I just loved everything about it. So at about 10, 11, I started secretly writing lyrics down, writing poetry down. But being a young boy, nobody cares about your songwriting ability. They just want to know if you want to play football or something. So as I got a little older, I would say about 12, from 10 to 12 is when I started secretly sharing my verses with people. I would tell them my dad brought home a mixtape from New York, and the guy on the mixtape said this thing and that thing. And if they liked it, then I would tell them, hey, this is me. I really wrote that song. I really wrote this verse. And if it wasn't so good, then I would tell them, no, look, I don't know what this guy was doing. He's not going to make it. He's not going to go far. So, doing that for a couple of summers, I would say we get up to 8th grade. And there was an English assignment where we had to write poetry. Didn't have to be anything crazy, just a few lines about life in your neighborhood. And I remember writing a piece, and I just did pretty much a social commentary about life in my neighborhood. Certain things that were going on in the community in that time. And I remember there was a line in the poem that said, I'm from where hoop dreams deflate and they never graduate. And in the hip hop community, specifically poetry too, there's a sound you kind of hear when you know you caught someone's attention, or, okay, that was a good line. And it's usually a or a, oh, okay. And that's when I got my first response. I got my first as they say. And I, smiling from ear to ear, finished the rest of the poem, and then got my first applause ever. Because before this, I was just sharing my poetry and my lyrics with people in secret and in private. So to publicly be accepted, I mean, it might have been a classroom of 20, maybe 30 students. It felt like 30,000. You couldn't tell me they didn't carry me out into a sea of fans, and I'm up there in the Hall of Fame and all of that. So it was the first time and one of the most amazing feelings, receiving my first ovation. So on cloud 9, took that energy home to my mom, shared my experience with her. She made me read the poem. She liked it, so I got the stamp of approval from my mom, which was excellent. And then she pulls out a floppy disk, pretty much a very old flash drive for those who aren't old enough to remember those days. And she shares with me some poems that she wrote in high school. And we're talking in the 70s, she wrote these, I believe, and still relevant to this day. The content was still moving, still powerful. I felt the same way I felt reading my mother's poetry as I felt listening to some of my favorite music. And so then riding that high of, my first applause, my mother's receptive of my writing now. And at this time I had already written and recorded, again in secret, a few rap songs and things like that. And let's just say it wasn't the most well-mannered music. It was completely ridiculous music for a 13-year-old to make. Admittingly enough, it was laced with profanity, which I don't approve of. And my mother didn't either. So we had another conversation about if I'm gonna choose a career in music and being in the public eye, then one thing I should always make sure I do is say something worth saying and something worth listening to. And one of those things she always ingrained in me was tell my own truth. Because again, I am an individual. We all are individuals. And again, you want to stand out for all of the right reasons. So I took that energy and carried that with me through high school, earned a reputation as a battle rapper and a poet, was in choir all through high school, ended up writing my high school graduation song. So, it just started to all fall into place that music is, for lack of a better term, music is my home. That's my family, and knowing now that I have the blessings and the talent that was given to me through my mother and through my peers around me, I was ready to take on the world. I ended up going to UC, where I met another woman that would change my life, Jenny Faith Wright, also known as Black Butterfly, who was building a slam poetry team at that time. She built it up. I joined the team, and she just taught me everything I needed to know about performing, sharing my honest truth with the world, and just getting that to translate into a relatable message. So again, everything's moving upward and upward, and I end up moving out to LA to get married, still pursuing music, still working on my music, where I end up meeting my now business partner, Comp. From Baltimore, turned out we were out in LA at the same time. We meet up and we start doing shows. And our first show, I'll admit it, I don't know if he will, but I'll admit it, was a flop. I mean, we had 8 artists show up, and those 8 artists performed for the 8 artists that were there. But we all shared the same vision, the same passion, the same love for music. And we took that show on the road and built it up to bigger and bigger things, to where, I mean, at some point we had celebrities coming out to our shows, Dave Foley, Maia Campbell. It just things I would have never thought that I would be able to see from my humble beginnings. And then it all sort of started to fall apart. I ended up getting divorced shortly after that. Ended up moving back to Cincinnati, back in my mom's house, where she thankfully allowed me to, as we say in my circle, just kind of cut my microphone on and get weird and express myself. And that was those moments where we would quote unquote get weird are where some of the most meaningful and truthful songs came out. Those are where songs like Witness came from, I Don't Want to Ride Your Wave, poems like Shoulda Be, just these real vulnerable moments where you give a piece of yourself to the world. And at a time when I felt at my lowest, felt like a failure in marriage and life and music, was when some of the most honest of my creations came about. I ended up being fortunate and blessed enough to work with Fernando Perdomo on the record, and Nakia Shante and the great people at Poems Inc. shot a video for me. And since then, it's just been, again, back on that elevated climb. And I'm able to share my story here with you all today. And the one thing I want to leave you with is what I've been told my entire life is your family is, you may end up having to make your family be what you make it to be, blood or otherwise. Once you find your village to protect you and to lift you and support you, anything is possible. And I just want to give this time to acknowledge everybody that's given me the opportunity to be my weird and my unique and individual self. And just thank you all for taking time out to listen to my story.
Well, thank you for telling that story. I have to say, your mom sounds like an amazing woman. Can you give her a shout out to your mom?
Definitely. My mom, Viola Howell.
Is she watching?
People know her in the Mount Healthy community.
Is she watching tonight?
I believe so. My phone just died sharing this with all my friends and family. So, so I'm sure I'll get the messages to find out soon enough.
Well, we'll send her the link, okay?
Yeah.
Good job. Hey, everybody tonight did such a fantastic job. We really want to thank, what a solid group of storytellers. Those are beautiful personal stories about your remarkable families, and your memories and your life-changing lessons. I mean, what a treat to have you share all of that with us. I can't thank you enough. And thank you to our virtual audience as well. You know, this is the conclusion of tonight's show, but we hope that you enjoyed the last hour of real life storytelling. It was sure fun for me on this end. We hope to see you back here in several weeks. Our next shows, excuse me, are September 13th on the topic of home and November 18th, which will be all about traditions. We'll see you then.
I'm very optimistic about what the ultimate impact of these vaccines will be. When you get a certain percentage of the population vaccinated, we can create an umbrella of herd immunity literally over the entire country. That will take several months to occur, but I feel confident that if we get a substantial proportion of the population vaccinated, that we can actually end this epidemic as we know it in this country.
The vaccine is important, and it's a protective measure. Wearing a mask is important also. Physical distancing of 6 feet is important.
The vaccine is a huge step forward, but it is not a silver bullet. And so after people receive the vaccine, we still need to do the simple things that we know work.